Today we're going to talk about real-world ratio problems. So where am I going to see all these different ratios that we've been learning about in my day-to-day life? Where would they be in the real world, right? So we're going to go through a couple of word problems, and mostly these are about percentages and comparing the part to the whole item. So problem number 1 says Carol spends 17 hours in a 2-week period practicing her culinary skills. So she's doing a lot of cooking over the course of 2 weeks. How many hours does she practice in 5 weeks? Well, the way I'm going to look at this problem is I'm going to write a ratio comparing hours to weeks, right? So if she's practicing 17 hours for every 2 weeks, there's not really a nice way for me to think about how she would practice in 5 weeks. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the unit rate. I'm going to turn that 17 hours for every 2 weeks into how many hours for every 1 week. So in order to do that, I just simplify that fraction or reduce it by a magic 1. So 2 divided by 2 would equal 1. So 17 divided by 2 would be my new numerator, which is actually 8.5 or 8.5, right? So if I know that Carol spends 8.5 hours per week, how many hours does she practice in 5 weeks? Well, 8.5 times 5 for the 5 weeks. I do out my long multiplication, and I'm going to get 42.5 or 42.5 hours in those 5 weeks. Especially in word problems, don't forget that you always want to make sure you're answering the question that's being asked, right? It's not enough to just solve the ratio. You actually have to make sure you're saying what the answer is. Number 2 says, in the typing world, 80 words per minute is considered an acceptable speed for typing. So how many words per minute, how many words per 30 minutes is this? So in the world, I'm looking at 80 words per minute. And I want to know how many words would I be able to type in 30 minutes. Again, this is just a simple ratio, but I know that I type 80 words in 1 minute. So if I take 80 and I multiply it by 30 minutes, I'm going to get 2,400 words. And that number of words is typed in 30 minutes, right? So maybe you might want to say 2,400 words per 30 minutes. Problem number 3 says a student answered 86 problems on a test correctly and received a grade of a 98%. How many problems were on the test if all the problems were worth the same number of points? First of all, I want to remind you that 98% means 98 out of 100. A percentage sign actually looks kind of like 100 because it's made up of 1 line and 2 zeros. So whenever you see a percentage sign, you know that your denominator is going to be 100. If she received a grade of 98% and she got 86 problems right, we want to find out how many problems are on the test. This is an example where we're going to want to use the cross product, where we're going to want to cross multiply. So 98 times x, or 98 multiplied by the unknown number, right? The number of problems on the test should equal to 86 times 100, which is 8,600. We learned this fact a few videos ago when we talked about the cross product having to equal each other when we're looking at ratios. So what I know is that 98 multiplied by the number of questions on the test is going to equal 8,600 or 8,600. If I want to know how many questions are on the test, all I need to do is get rid of the 98%. So I'm going to divide 98 by 98, and that's going to equal 1 times the number of questions on the test, right? 1 times that x. 1 times any number is just that number. So it's just x, and I can drop the 1 altogether. But what I don't know is what is 8,600 divided by 98, right? If I divided this side by 98, I also have to divide this side by 98. So 8,600 divided by 98 is actually 88 test questions. And again, this is something you're going to be able to use a calculator on. You just want to be able to remember the process. How did I figure out what that x actually equals? We'll do one more like that. A crew is made up of 8 men. The rest are women. So I have 8 men. 66 and 2/3% of the crew are men. 66 and 2/3 is the same as 66.6, right? You probably know this. And it's a percentage, so it's going to go over 100. How many people are in the crew total? So the crew, I don't know what that is. I'm going to use a C for that missing value of the crew because it's going to help me out. But what I do know is that the number of men over the total number in the crew is equal to 66%. Once again, I'm going to use my cross product. 8 times 100 is 800, and that by definition has to equal 66.6 times or multiplied by the number of people total in my crew. So for each person in my crew, I'm looking at 66%, so I want to divide by 66.6. Remember, if I divide 2 by 2, it equals 1. If I divide 66.6 by 66.6, it still equals 1. So I get 1 times C, and the number 1 is the identity, so 1 times C is just equal to C. So what I really need to do is 800 divided by 66.6, which is approximately 12 people on the crew total. If I went back and plugged this into my calculator and I said 8 men over 12 people in the total crew, and I divided that in my calculator and I said, what's 8 divided by 12? I would get 0.6666, which is the same as 66.6%. So you can always go back and check with your calculator whether or not your ratio is accurate. Don't forget to solve your proof problems. If Joseph drives 125 miles in 2.5 hours at the same rate, how far will he be able to drive